Today we're making 2 dessert crostadas in our wood-fired oven. One with apple and one with pear. This is a recipe out of Andrea Mugnaini's book, The Art of Wood-Fired Cooking. The cover of the book actually features a picture of the apple crostata we'll be making, so that's kind of cool. This was our first time making a crostata, so we made a lot of mistakes, and they didn't turn out looking quite as good as the picture here, but they were really good, and we had a lot of fun making them. These are honestly one of my favorite things to make in the oven now. Crostatas are a free-form, rustic Italian pie that closely resembles a galette, which is a French dish. They have a pastry dough base and can have a savory or sweet filling. These are baked in a normal baking environment of around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. To get the oven into this stage, we fully heat the oven up to 900 degrees and then let it cool down to the temperature that we need. The crostatas are baked using the radiant heat from the bricks in the dome and the conductive heat from the bricks in the floor. We need to fully saturate the bricks with the full amount of heat so that they can maintain the oven temperature for an extended period of time. The pastry dough is made ahead of time. In the recipe it recommends making it at least 2 hours in advance, but I'm making this the night before. The pastry dough consists of flour, cold water, salt, chilled butter, and chilled shortening. Using a food processor, we mix in the flour and salt, followed by the butter and shortening. Mix that up and then pour in the water a little bit at a time while blending until the dough starts to come together. We want to handle this dough with our hands as little as possible to make sure the dough is cold the entire time we're working with it. Otherwise the butter and shortening start to melt and it becomes very difficult to work with. Once the dough starts to come together, dump it onto the counter, gather it into a ball, press it into a thick disc about 4 to 5 inches in diameter, and then flour the dough lightly, wrap it in plastic, and place it in the fridge overnight. The crostata filling is made with fruit. In this case we're making one with Granny Smith apples and one with pears. Also in the filling is dried dates, dried apricots, crystallized ginger, orange zest, orange juice, sugar, and cinnamon. We mix the filling together, place it in the pastry dough, and then top it with the heavy cream and butter. At that point we bake it, and then after it comes out of the oven we top it with powdered sugar. First we'll prepare the pear filling. Chop about 4 pears into thin slices and dump them into the bowl. Add half a cup of the dates, 3/4 cup of the apricots, and 3 tablespoons of the ginger. Add in half a cup of sugar, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, and then the juice and the zest of the orange. We mix those together and then we have our filling. We'll do the same thing with the same ingredients for the apple filling, replacing the pears with 4 Granny Smith apples. Now it's time to roll out the pastry dough. Here's where the mistakes start coming in. The first thing we want to do is flour the top of the pastry dough and then begin rolling out the dough with a rolling pin. The recipe said to roll out the dough on parchment paper, but I didn't really see any reason to do that. It kind of just gets in the way. You can just roll it out on the counter and move it out onto the parchment paper afterwards. The parchment paper for us was just sliding around the entire time and it made it way more difficult than it needed to be. But we want to roll out the dough to about 14-inch diameter. At this point we have the dough at about the perfect size, but we kept rolling it out because we misread the pie dough measurement thing that we had below the parchment paper. But anyway, at this point the dough is like 17 inches in diameter and it's way too thin. We tried to get it free from the parchment paper, but we ended up just ripping the sides a bunch. The more you handle this dough, the worse it gets because the butter melts, and we handled this dough way too much. Regardless though, we continue on and we fill the dough with the apple filling, leaving a couple inch space around the edge, and then we pull the edges up towards the middle. Again, because the dough is so thin and melted at this point, it became extremely sticky and hard to work with, and it just ripped everywhere. We also probably put too much filling in, but I think that's fine, because we didn't want to waste any of the filling. But in the end, we managed to get something resembling a crostata out of it, and we moved it onto the pizza peel, and we trimmed the parchment paper.
Oh, the butter.
Lastly, we topped it with about 2 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream, a tablespoon of butter, and a tablespoon of sugar. And now that mess is ready to go in the oven. For the pear crostata, we actually managed to fix a couple of our mistakes. We still rolled out the pastry on the parchment paper, which again, wasn't really necessary. We still rolled out the pastry too thin as well, which made it harder to work with. But it's much better this time. It isn't quite as thin, and we didn't mess with it nearly as much, so it wasn't as sticky. We fill the dough with the pear filling and curl up the edges towards the middle. We managed to form this crostada without ripping the pastry, so already we're getting better. Top the crostada with the butter, the cream, and the sugar, move it onto a pizza peel, and we'll head out to the oven to put these in. The oven here is about 400 to 420 degrees. To get these in the oven, we just slide them directly onto the hearth. These will bake for about 30 to 35 minutes in total, but we'll come back in about 15 minutes to check in on them and remove the parchment paper. So we can see here now that the crostadas have split at the edges and spilled out all over the oven, which really is a shame because I bet that stuff would actually taste pretty good if it was still inside the crostada. But regardless, we need to remove the parchment paper, which ended up being a lot easier than I was expecting. You just pick up the crostada and slide the parchment paper off of it. And you're probably thinking at this point, that looks like a mess to clean up. But the nice thing about wood-fired ovens is they're self-cleaning. We just lit a fire and it cleaned it.
Wow, that was so easy.
After another 20 minutes, we check on the crostadas and they're done. If we haven't made enough mistakes already, the apple crostada actually split in half when we were taking it out of the oven.
Oh no, it broke in half. There's no, it's like ashes. Is it in the ashes? Yeah, no, you're good, you're good.
At least the pear crostata came out in one piece.
Okay. Well.
We brought these inside and topped them with some powdered sugar. And to make it really good, we topped it with some homemade whipped cream and salted caramel ice cream. These crostadas definitely didn't go as smoothly as we were hoping for, but they still tasted great. We had a ton of fun making these and we'll definitely be making them more in the future. We ended up making these again a couple weeks later and it went a lot smoother. We made an apple crostada again, which turned out better than our first attempts, and then we tried a savory one with chicken, spinach, and feta, and that turned out really great as well. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.